You're not coming. Deshawn tore his wife's boarding pass in half at the gate. The terminal went silent. His mistress smiled and walked beside him toward first class. Everyone watched Renee, waiting for her to break. She didn't. She pulled out her phone and made one call. Then she sat down, because the flight hadn't boarded yet, and the person in seat 1A was already picking up. The gate area at Terminal D was packed that Tuesday morning. Families dragging rolling bags, business travelers staring at phones, a young couple sharing earbuds near the window, watching planes idle on the tarmac in the early gray light. It was the kind of ordinary crowd that becomes a witness without ever choosing to. The kind that remembers what they saw for years afterward, not because they wanted to, but because some things carve themselves into memory, whether you invite them in or not. Renee had been standing near the window with her carry-on when Deshawn walked up beside her, took the boarding pass out of her hand without a word, and tore it, clean down the center. The sound was small, a paper sound, but the terminal heard it the way a room hears a glass break, that split second of collective stillness before anyone fully understands what happened. A child sitting 2 rows away looked up from a tablet. A gate agent's eyes flicked up from her screen and then back down. Nobody said anything, because nobody knew yet what kind of moment this was. Camille stood 2 steps behind him. She was wearing a cream blazer and dark travel pants, her natural hair pinned at the crown, a single gold bracelet at her left wrist with a pearl charm at the center. She didn't say anything when Deshawn tore the ticket. She didn't have to. The slow pull of her lips, the way her chin lifted just slightly when she met Renee's eyes, that was enough. It was the expression of a woman who has decided that winning is not sufficient, that the other person also needs to see it clearly. She held the look for 2 full seconds. Then she looked away, as though Renee had already become part of the background. Deshawn placed the first-class boarding pass in Camille's hand and turned toward the boarding lane without looking back. He said something to the gate agent that Renee could not hear. The gate agent nodded without expression. A man near the charging station looked away from the scene with the particular care of someone who does not want to be involved. A woman with a sleeping toddler on her shoulder watched Renee with something close to grief in her face. The kind of face that says, "I have been somewhere near this before, and I would not wish it on anyone." Renee looked at the 2 torn halves of her boarding pass on the floor. Then she bent down, slowly, deliberately, without any sign of embarrassment, picked both pieces up, folded them once along the existing crease, and slid them into the inside pocket of her coat. She smoothed the pocket flat with 2 fingers. She did not look at the boarding lane. She did not raise her voice. She turned, walked to the nearest row of seats, sat down, crossed her legs, and pulled out her phone. She made one call. She spoke for 30 seconds, her voice low and level, and when she ended the call, she placed the phone face down on her knee and sat with her hands perfectly still. Her breathing was even. Her eyes tracked the jetway door as it opened for boarding with the expression of someone watching a scheduled event arrive on time. There was a woman sitting 3 rows away who would later describe this moment to her sister on the phone that evening. She said she had never seen anything like it. Not the tearing of the ticket. She had seen cruelty in airports before, the particular public ugliness of a relationship breaking in front of strangers. What she had not seen before was what came after. The way Renee's face looked during that 30-second call, like a person who had rehearsed a long and complicated piece of music for months and was now simply playing it. Like someone checking that the last instrument was in tune before the performance began. She wasn't left behind. She was exactly where she needed to be. 12 years earlier, Renee had been sitting in the back row of a church fundraiser when a man in a blue dress shirt stood up to present a business proposal to a room that was not particularly interested in hearing one. He was 29, nervous in the way people are when they care about something more than they want to show, and the slideshow behind him kept losing its connection to the projector. She had laughed, not at him, but at the situation, and he had caught her laughing, and instead of being embarrassed, he had laughed too. That was how it started, that small, shared laugh in the back of a church hall, and the feeling that came with it that she had found someone who did not take himself too seriously. She had been wrong about that eventually, but not at the beginning. At the beginning, Deshaun was easy to love. He was ambitious and generous and funny in the dry, quiet way she liked. He had ideas that were too big for his budget, and she believed in them before the money existed. When he talked about the logistics company he wanted to build, she listened not the way people listen to be polite, but the way people listen when they intend to help. She co-signed the first business loan because her credit was better than his, and because she understood what he was building, and because she was the kind of woman who went all the way in when she chose something. She relocated when the company needed to expand. She managed the books on weekends for 2 years without pay. She gave up a promotion at the hospital she had been working toward for 6 years because the timing did not work around Deshaun's expansion schedule. She did these things not as sacrifice, not with resentment building underneath, but because she believed the life they were building together was solid and real and going somewhere she wanted to be. The first sign she noticed was not dramatic. For years, Deshaun had talked through his business decisions with her at the kitchen table. Contracts, potential clients, expansion plans, risks he was weighing. One evening, she realized he had not done that in 4 months. She sat with this awareness for a moment, then she let it go. Then it came back. Then came the calls he took outside. Not 1 or 2, which could be explained, but many, a pattern. Then came the travel schedule that stopped including details. Then came the way he corrected her in front of people. Small corrections. The kind that could look like helpfulness from across a room but landed differently up close. He would say, "That's not really how it works," or "Let me handle it," or "You don't need to know that part." Each time it happened in front of friends or colleagues, something microscopic shifted in the room, a realignment of who held authority between them. And Renee would say nothing and smile and redirect the conversation. But she was watching. She had always been the kind of woman who watched, quietly, completely, without announcing what she was cataloging. The company dinner was in the fall of the previous year. Deshaun had invited several key staff members and 2 potential investors to a restaurant downtown. He introduced Camille as his office manager, a position she had held for 8 months. She was poised and well-spoken and attentive to Deshaun in a way that was not quite professional and not quite anything else. Renee shook her hand and said it was nice to meet her. They spoke briefly about a conference Camille had recently attended. Camille was articulate. She was also wearing a gold bracelet with a single pearl charm at the center. It was a small thing, a piece of jewelry most people would not remember. But Renee noticed it the way the mind sometimes marks things without being instructed to, filing them in a place below conscious decision for reasons that only become clear later. She said nothing about it. She finished her dinner. She smiled for photographs. She rode home beside Deshaun in silence that he mistook for contentment. She was adding things up. She just had not yet reached the sum. It was a Wednesday night in February when Deshawn left his laptop open on the kitchen counter. He had gone upstairs to take a call, which was ordinary by then, the calls upstairs, the closed doors. What was not ordinary was that the email thread on the screen was already open, already loaded, and Renee was standing close enough to read the subject line without moving toward it. She moved toward it. The thread ran 47 messages deep, spanning 14 months. It was a chain between Deshawn, his older brother Terrence, a corporate attorney, and a financial restructuring firm based in Atlanta. The language in the emails was technical and layered, the kind of language built to be understood only by people who already know what they are looking for. But Renee had managed company books for 2 years. She understood the language. She read from the beginning to the most recent message, moving through it with the methodical care of someone who is not looking for confirmation of a suspicion, but for the complete picture of a fact. The picture was this. For the past 18 months, Terrence had been drafting documents to dissolve Renee's equity stake in the company. Because she had co-signed the original business loan, she was legally a silent equity holder, something Deshawn had apparently never fully accounted for when he began planning to leave. The restructuring was designed to strip her share before a divorce filing. The divorce was not being discussed as a possibility. It had a date attached to it. Terrence had identified the legal mechanism, drafted the documents, and began the filing process. The Atlanta firm had confirmed the approach was viable if completed before Renee was legally notified of the divorce. She read Terrence's name in those emails 14 times. Terrence, who had been in their lives since before the marriage. Terrence, who called Renee his sister when he introduced her to colleagues. Terrence, who had sat at their dining room table 2 weeks ago for Jalen's birthday dinner, who had eaten 2 pieces of cake and asked her for the recipe, who had hugged her at the door when he left and said she had built something real here, and who had driven away having already filed documents designed to take half of it from her. Renee stood at the counter for 6 minutes. She did not touch the laptop. She closed it exactly as she had found it, wiped the counter around it clean of a coffee ring that had been there before she arrived, turned off the kitchen light, and walked upstairs. She made tea. She got into bed. She lay on her side and watched the ceiling while the house settled around her, while Deshawn's call went on behind the closed door of the office down the hall, while the heat kicked on and the refrigerator hummed and her son slept 3 rooms away. She lay there until well after midnight, and by the time she finally closed her eyes, something inside her had finished moving and arrived somewhere very quiet and very clear. Past shock, past grief, past the part where a person cries, into a place that was only thought. She was back in the kitchen before Deshawn came downstairs the next morning. Coffee was made. Jalen's lunch was packed. She asked if he wanted eggs. He said he was running late. She said, "Okay, have a good day." He did not look at her face when he left. There was one line in the email chain she had not yet understood. Near the bottom, Terrence had written to the restructuring firm, "The Geneva closing, confirmed for the 14th. She did not know what closed in Geneva on the 14th. She understood that she needed to find out. She understood that she had time, and that time was now the most important thing she had. She began finding out the next morning. Patricia Okafor ran her practice from a 3rd-floor office on the east side of downtown, and she had seen asset-stripping cases before, seen them in every shape that bitterness and greed and arrogance produce over the course of a long career in corporate litigation. She was thorough and direct and uninterested in reassurance. She reviewed Renee's documentation across 2 meetings and reached her conclusion with the efficiency of someone who has seen this pattern enough times to recognize it quickly. Because the original loan co-signature had never been formally separated from equity under the company's foundational operating agreement. A detail Deshawn's early attorney had not closed properly, and Terrence had apparently missed or ignored when structuring the dissolution. Renee's share was still legally active. The restructuring Terrence had filed was fraudulent. If completed, it would constitute intentional financial fraud against a documented equity holder. Patricia said this without particular emphasis, the way she said everything, and then she set her pen down and asked Renee what she wanted to do about it. Renee told her. Patricia wrote it down and said she could have the counterfiling ready within 6 weeks. She asked if Renee needed anything else. Renee said she would be in touch about timing. She thanked Patricia, picked up her bag, and took the elevator down to the street, and stood in the cold for a moment before walking to her car. Over the following 6 weeks, Renee did nothing at home that looked like preparation. She made dinner. She helped Jalen with homework and attended his soccer games and drove him to his Saturday morning art class. She went to work at the hospital. She met her deadlines. She was present and unremarkable. At Deshawn's company anniversary reception, she wore a dress she had owned for 3 years, smiled in 3 photographs with people she recognized from the restructuring emails, and gave nothing away. Deshawn, growing more confident by the week, became careless in the ways that overconfident people always do. He stopped switching apps when she entered a room. He stopped building elaborate explanations for late evenings. He had already decided that she did not know, and so he stopped behaving like a man who needed to be careful around her. Camille came to the house twice during those 6 weeks. The first time, she appeared at the front door with a contract Deshawn had supposedly left at the office, holding the folder with the particular care of someone who wants to be seen being helpful. The second time, she came with a venue recommendation for a business dinner, and she stood at the doorway an extra few seconds longer than the errand required. Both times, Camille's expression carried the same upward tilt from the airport, that quiet look of a woman who wanted the other woman to know where things stood. Both times, Renee received whatever was being delivered, said thank you, and closed the door. She offered Camille nothing back, not hostility, not pain, not even acknowledgement of the subtext. Nothing. Because nothing was all that was warranted, and because a woman who is 3 moves ahead does not spend energy on the opening. The invitation came from Deshawn on a Sunday morning. He sat across from her at the kitchen table and told her he had a major freight conference in Geneva coming up. Key investors, important contracts, relationships worth building in person. He said he had booked 2 first-class tickets, that it might be good for them to travel together, see the city. He said it with the smoothness of a man who has rehearsed something until the rehearsal marks no longer show. Renee looked at him across the table and said it sounded wonderful. She said she had been hoping they could spend some real time together. She smiled in a way she had learned from 12 years of watching him need to be believed. That evening, after Jalen was asleep, she called Patricia. She said, he took the bait. What Deshawn did not know, what Terrence did not know, what Camille did not know, was that Patricia had already contacted Eleanor Voss 2 weeks earlier. Eleanor led the primary investment group behind the Geneva closing, a private equity firm with positions in 3 continents, and a reputation for moving carefully before it moved at all. She was rigorous and exacting, and did not place her signature on documents she had not read fully. When Patricia sent her a summary of the equity irregularities with supporting documentation, Eleanor had read it, asked 3 precise questions, received 3 precise answers, and agreed to a private meeting before the closing session. She had booked her own seat on the Geneva flight before Deshawn had even thought to book Renee's. She was sitting in seat 1A. Everything was already in place. The only remaining step was the flight itself, and the flight was already booked, and Renee had already packed her navy blazer in a separate section of her carry-on and pressed it the night before. Because when the moment came, she intended to look exactly like herself. Composed, prepared, and dressed for the room she was about to walk into. Back in the terminal, 8 minutes after Deshawn and Camille disappeared through the jetway, a gate agent crossed the boarding area and stopped in front of Renee. She did not approach with sympathy or with the careful manner of someone managing a scene. She approached with the quiet efficiency of a person who has been expecting to do this. A gate agent responding to a request that had been made through the airline's service desk 30 minutes before Renee had even reached the airport that morning. She held out a new boarding pass. Seat 2A, upgraded. Renee thanked her, stood, picked up her carry-on, and joined the boarding queue without hurry. She walked through first class at the pace of someone who belongs there. Deshawn was in the window seat with Camille beside him in the aisle seat, their bags already overhead. Camille had her shoes off and a travel pillow arranged behind her neck. She had ordered something from the attendant. Deshawn was looking at his phone with the deliberate posture of a man pretending to be absorbed. He saw Renee in his peripheral vision when she was 3 rows back. He turned. The sequence of his expression was quick but visible. Surprise, then a reflexive effort at composure, then something slower and harder to name. A recalibration, a reaching for a story that would explain this, and not finding one fast enough. He leaned toward Camille and said something low. Camille looked back briefly, her eyes finding Renee, and then she faced forward and reached for her drink with a steadiness that was clearly worked at. Renee did not meet either of their eyes. She took her seat in 2A, stowed her bag, fastened her seatbelt, and opened her folder of documents on the tray table. She reviewed them with the same methodical quiet she brought to everything she had done over the past 6 weeks. Not reading, confirming. Checking that the architecture was still sound, the way an engineer checks a bridge one final time, not because she doubts it, but because she built it, and the responsibility is hers. The woman in seat 1A had not turned around. She had her own documents spread across her tray table, a pair of reading glasses pushed halfway down her nose, working through a dense packet with the focused economy of someone who treats time in the air as time that belongs to her. She was in her early 60s, silver at her temples, wearing a charcoal blazer that said nothing about itself and everything about the woman inside it. A flight attendant moved through first class with the pre-departure pass. She paused at 1A and leaned slightly. "Ms. Voss, can I get you anything before we take off?" The name moved through the cabin like a specific kind of silence, the silence of a word landing in the one place it was always going to land. Deshawn's hand on the armrest went still. He did not look back immediately. The pause before he turned was long enough to show that he already knew what he would see when he did. When he finally turned, he looked at the top of the headrest in front of him, at the silver visible above it, and his face did something that had no performance left in it at all. Just understanding, the kind that arrives too late and knows it. Camille put her hand on his forearm. He didn't move toward it or away from it. His eyes stayed on the back of seat 1A. The plane began to move. Renee watched the runway expand beneath them through the window, the terminal pulling away, the gray morning opening into the gray sky above it, and her expression was the expression of a woman watching something she had built from nothing begin to work exactly as she designed it to. Not satisfaction, not relief. Something quieter than either, the particular peace of having prepared completely for something, and now simply being inside it. Behind her, Deshawn did not speak to Camille for the first hour of the flight. Camille ordered champagne when the attendant came through, more deliberately than she needed to, angling toward the aisle so the motion was visible to the row behind. She leaned toward Deshawn and said something low, probably meant to anchor him, to remind him of what they were flying toward. He responded with a single syllable. She turned back to the window. Renee did not watch any of this. She did not need to. She had a folder of documents, a plan that was already in motion, and 7 hours of quiet altitude to sit inside her own stillness. She ordered water. She reviewed 2 pages of notes. She closed the folder and looked out at the clouds below the wing, white and even and going nowhere, and she let herself exist in the particular calm of a person who has already done everything that can be done and is now simply waiting for the world to catch up. The conference room at the Geneva Hotel occupied the 4th floor's northwest corner, with floor-to-ceiling windows on one wall and the old city visible through the glass in the heavy, golden light of late afternoon. A long mahogany table, 12 leather chairs, water carafes, and a coffee service already arranged and cooling slightly by the time the parties arrived. It was the kind of room that had hosted 100 serious decisions. It was about to host one more. Terrence arrived with Deshawn and immediately arranged his documents the way men do when they need to feel in command of a room. He greeted the other parties with the efficient warmth of an attorney who considers these situations controlled environments. The man from a London investment firm, a representative from a Dubai capital group, the Swiss attorney handling the local legal close. All present, all settled. The room looked, from the outside, like a closing. Deshawn sat at the table and straightened his jacket. He had not slept well on the flight. He had not spoken more than 12 words to Camille in the car from the hotel. He was present in the way people are when they are managing too many things at once, keeping the surface calm while the underneath does its own work. Eleanor Voss entered 3 minutes after the meeting was called. She did not apologize for the 3 minutes. She shook hands briefly and efficiently around the table, nodded at the 2 video screens where remote participants were joining. One of them, at the far left screen, showed Patricia Okafor in her downtown office, suit jacket on, documents visible on the desk beside her laptop. And she took the chair at the head of the table, settled her documents in front of her, and poured herself water from the carafe. She looked at the room and said, "Before we open the closing documents, I need to address a legal matter that was flagged to my team this week." She said it the way a person says the weather is changing. Not as a question, not as an accusation, as a statement of something that was already true and had been true before any of them walked into this room. She slid document packets to each seat. The room was quiet for 40 seconds while people read. Deshawn picked up the first page. His eyes moved across it and then stopped. He put the page down and looked at Terrence. Terrence was reading with the particular stillness of a man who recognizes every word because he wrote them. The door behind Deshawn opened. Renee walked in. She was wearing the navy blazer from her carry-on, her natural hair pinned back cleanly. She moved to the empty seat beside Patricia's screen with the assurance of someone who had chosen it in advance. She set 2 things on the table in front of her, a manila folder, and the 2 halves of the torn boarding pass from gate 14B, taken from the inside pocket of her coat, unfolded and laid flat side by side on the mahogany with one smooth motion of her hand. She did not explain them. They were not evidence in any legal sense. They were something else. A line drawn, a fact acknowledged, a statement made without words to the only person in the room who understood their full weight. Deshawn looked at them. His throat moved. He looked away and then back, the way the eyes returned to something they would prefer not to see. Renee addressed Eleanor. She spoke for just over 4 minutes. She did not raise her voice at any point. She did not use the word betrayal. She used equity structure, fraudulent dissolution, documented timeline, legal remedy. She named Terrence specifically and walked through his involvement with the precision of someone reading from a record that had already been verified. The dates of the filings, the communications with the Atlanta firm, the date of Jalen's birthday dinner, the 12 years of co-signature history that had made the company's first loan possible and had never been legally separated from equity. She said that Patricia had filed an emergency motion in federal court that morning, which had frozen the restructuring pending a full audit. She said the Geneva closing could not legally proceed. She finished speaking and folded her hands on the table in front of her. The room went silent in a way that had nothing to do with the absence of sound and everything to do with the presence of something undeniable. The Swiss attorney set his pen down beside his documents. The man from London looked at the window. The Dubai representative's expression showed nothing, which was its own clear verdict. Patricia, on the screen, sat quietly with her hands folded in nearly the same position as Renee's. Deshawn stood up. The chair scraped back, and the sound of it cut through the room. He said Renee was vindictive. He said she had always resented his success. He said she had no right to be in this room, that this was a business meeting, that whatever domestic grievances she had could be handled through their attorneys and not in front of his investors. His voice climbed by the 3rd sentence and cracked very slightly by the 5th. Every person at the table watched him the way you watch something approaching the edge of something else. Eleanor Voss waited. She gave him the full space of it, letting every word land and settle. When he stopped speaking, she looked at him with complete calm and said, "Mr. Deshawn, sit down." He sat down. Terrence cleared his throat and began a sentence. Patricia, from the screen, spoke one sentence, a citation from the State Bar's Ethical Conduct Code regarding attorney participation in client fraud, and Terrence's sentence ended before it had properly begun. He put his pen on the table and looked at the surface of it. Eleanor looked around the room. She said she would be withdrawing her investment group from the closing pending a complete legal review. She said this without animosity and without drama, the way a person states something that was already decided before she walked in. She closed her documents and stood and said she hoped everyone had a safe return to their respective cities. At the door, she paused. She turned back, not to the room, but specifically to Renee. What passed between them lasted only a moment, not warmth exactly, something more precise than warmth. Recognition. 2 women who understood, without needing to discuss it, what preparation costs and what it is worth. Then Eleanor left. The door closed behind her. And the room, the closing room, the room Terrence had been building toward for 18 months, the room Deshawn believed was his greatest arrival, simply ended. Not with argument, not with drama, with the quiet, total, final sound of something collapsing from the inside. Deshawn sat at the table after the others had quietly gathered their papers and excused themselves. Terrence left without looking at him. The Swiss attorney offered a brief, professional apology for the circumstances and closed the door gently behind him. The room emptied in under 4 minutes, the way rooms empty when the purpose of being in them no longer exists. Renee gathered the torn boarding pass halves, folded them back along the same crease, and returned them to her coat pocket. She picked up her folder. She stood, pushed in her chair, nodded once to Patricia's screen. Patricia nodded back and ended the call. Renee walked to the door. She put her hand on the handle. She did not look back at Deshawn. She opened the door and walked into the corridor, and the door swung shut behind her as naturally as any door closes after anyone leaves any room. Camille had been waiting in the hotel lobby for 3 hours and 50 minutes when the text arrived. It said, "Something came up, handle checkout." She read it twice. She set the phone down on the cushion beside her and looked at the atrium ceiling for a long moment. Then she picked up her bag, rode the elevator to the floor they had shared, packed her things into her suitcase with the particular efficiency of a woman who has done this kind of departure before, and checked out at the front desk without additional conversation. She took a separate car to the airport. The only seat available on her rebooking was in economy. She took it. The restructuring deal died completely within 48 hours. Eleanor Voss's withdrawal was the structural piece. Once the primary capital stepped back, the architecture of the closing fell. The London investor formally withdrew by email the following morning. The Dubai group sent a 1-sentence notice that same afternoon. They gave no explanation because experienced investors don't explain their exits from deals flagged by federal audit motions. The Geneva closing was over. Deshawn's company entered a formal legal review. Operations continued in reduced form. The day-to-day freight work went on, clients were served, trucks moved, but 3 major contracts were suspended pending resolution of the equity dispute. The company that had been on the edge of its largest expansion was suddenly, and very publicly, on the edge of something else entirely. Terrence's name appeared in the audit documentation, with the specificity that documentation produces when someone has kept thorough records. The State Bar opened a disciplinary inquiry within 30 days of Patricia's filing. His practice entered what his assistant described to a colleague as a difficult period, the kind that does not resolve quickly because it was not created quickly. 14 years of reputation, managed and cultivated and carefully maintained, entered a process that would take longer to conclude than anyone around him wanted to think about. Back home, the social geography shifted the way it does when truth starts moving through a community, not loudly, not all at once, but steadily, in the way water moves through something porous. Their church, the neighborhood network, the mutual friends who had known Renee as Deshawn's steady and capable wife for over a decade, all of it began to recalibrate. Deshawn had built his public warmth partly on hers. Her professional standing at the hospital, her presence at community events, the way people spoke of her when he wasn't in the room. It had given him an association with someone decent and trusted, and he had never thought to account for it because he had never thought to be grateful for it. Without her, that warmth simply did not transfer. He called her twice the first week after they returned. She did not answer. He sent 2 text messages that she read and did not respond to. He showed up at the house on a Thursday evening and rang the bell, and she came to the door and stood in the open frame and let him speak for 2 minutes. And then she said she had already spoken with a family law attorney and suggested he do the same. She said it without heat. She said it the way you say something that has already been decided. He stood on the porch for a moment after she closed the door, and then he got back in his car. Terrence sent a message through their family's aunt, a woman who had helped raise both brothers and who had always loved Renee with the uncomplicated affection of someone who could see clearly what a person was worth. The aunt called Renee on a Sunday afternoon, listened to one sentence of what she had been asked to relay, and told Renee she would not be delivering it. She said she was sorry. She said she had always known Renee was good people. They talked for 20 minutes about other things, and at the end of the call, the aunt said, "You keep going, baby." Renee said she intended to. Camille resurfaced 9 weeks later at an industry event on the other side of the city, photographed beside a man none of them knew. Deshawn heard about it through a mutual contact and said nothing to anyone in response. But two people who knew him well and saw his face when he heard said he looked like a man watching a door close, not with anger, but with the particular expression of someone who finally understands what they have lost, and understands it too late. He didn't lose everything because Renee fought him. He lost everything because the life he had built was always standing on someone else's foundation, and the moment she stepped off it, there was nothing underneath. 18 months later, on a Saturday afternoon in October, Renee's office building was quiet in the way only office buildings are quiet on weekends. A specific, clean quiet, all the ambient noise of the week removed, just the hum of the elevator system and the faint sound of the street 4 floors below. The afternoon light came through her window at the long, low angle that belongs to fall, cutting across her desk and warming the surface of it. Her desk held 3 neat stacks, client intake files for 2 new hospital accounts she had been developing, a proposal for a regional healthcare network she had spent 6 weeks writing and was now in its final draft, and a white coffee mug she had brought from home because she liked the weight of it in her hand and the sound it made when she set it down on wood. The mug said nothing on it. It was just a good mug. Small things like that mattered to her now in a way they hadn't when she was busy surviving something. The sound of sneakers moving fast down the hallway reached her a few seconds before the door swung open. Jalen came in at full speed, 11 years old and entirely unaware of the afternoon's quiet, holding up a soccer cleat with the ankle strap buckle, broken clean off its housing, presenting it to her with the urgent seriousness that children bring to shoe emergencies. Renee turned her chair toward him. She gave the cleat the full consideration it deserved. Jalen explained the situation in detail, including his theory of why the buckle had failed, which involved the specific way he had landed from a header in the second half of last week's practice. She listened without interruption. Then she opened the top drawer of her desk, moved aside a stapler and 2 pens, and found a wide, black binder clip. She fitted it through the strap loop and fastened it firmly enough to hold through an afternoon. She told him she would get the real buckle replaced after lunch. He looked at the binder clip with the considered skepticism of an 11-year-old evaluating adult improvisation. He tested it with 2 fingers. He decided it would hold. He ran back out, sneakers loud in the hallway, and the door swung slowly behind him, not quite closing all the way. Through the gap, Renee could see the frosted glass panel mounted beside the corridor door. On it, in clean, dark lettering, her name, and below it, the name of her firm. Healthcare Consulting. Her name on the glass. Her firm. Her building. Her accounts. Her proposal on her desk in the afternoon light. She turned back to the page in front of her. She picked up her pen. Outside, the city moved through its Saturday without urgency. The light on her hands was warm and steady. On a Tuesday the previous month, Deshawn had been driving through this part of the city on his way to a meeting and had slowed when the building came into view. He had pulled to the curb and sat with the engine running, looking at the name on the glass. He had sat there for a moment that lasted longer than moments usually do. Then he had put the car in drive and kept going. Some women cry at the gate. Some women sit down, make one call, and let the truth board first. Dignity is not loud. It does not chase, does not argue, does not perform itself for the people who wronged it or explain itself to the people who watched. It simply continues. Into the next room, the next season, the next quiet Saturday afternoon with a child running in from the hallway, and a pen moving across a page, and a name on a glass door that belongs to nobody else. That is what it looks like on the other side. Not a victory speech, not a final confrontation, just a woman at her desk in the afternoon light, her son's footsteps fading down the hallway, her work in front of her, and all the noise of what was done to her, finally, completely, behind her. She picked up her pen and kept writing. The page in front of her was not finished, and neither was she, and both of those things felt exactly right. If this story stayed with you, share it with someone who needs to remember what dignity looks like. And if you want more stories about women who never broke when they were supposed to, you know where to find them.